Today is February 25th, 2014, and we are interviewing George Harlow. George was born on February 19th, 1924. My name is Cheryl Walker, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Harlow. Mr. Harlow, could you state for the record what war and branch service you served in?
What'd you say?
What branch of service and what war did you serve
World
in?
War II, the United States Army Air Corps.
Okay. And your rank was?
Technical sergeant.
Okay. Would you like to share your story?
Certainly.
Okay. Go ahead.
I don't know where you want me to start. I think it's two of my friends, we decided to enlist in the Air Corps, and we went through the rigmarole paperwork and a physical, and we went into Chicago to take the oath of the United States Army Air Force. And the captain that was going to do that asked one person to step out of line because there was 13 of us. It was Friday the 13th, and he didn't want to have any bad luck for any of the people there, so he said, somebody step out, they wouldn't do it, so we had 13 guys taking the oath on Friday the 13th, and I don't know how the other fellows made out, but I thought that was a hell of a way to start an Army career. Then, went to Camp Grant, Illinois, clothing, shipped me all the way down to Biloxi, Mississippi for 10 days of Army Air Force technical schooling. I'm proud to say I passed and qualified for all the tests. And when we had a choice what we wanted, whether we want to go to weather, armament, radio, or whatever. I have to plead that I was quite selfish. There was a radio school in Chicago. There was a radio school in Rantoul, Illinois, the only two I ever heard of. So I took radio. I wanted to be a radio operator and a radio mechanic. So I took that. And briefly, am I taking too long? Okay. First thing they did, like I say, was ship us down to Biloxi, Mississippi, where all this took place. So now they put us on a train again to go to radio school. We go right up from the south, going right through Illinois to Rantoul, was in the center of Illinois. Train stops. I said, great. We don't get off. Hour later, the train pulled out. This is a crummy freight train, by the way. The travel, and I understand that in World War II that they didn't have a lot of passenger trains for us, and like there was an old mail car they had on there. That was our mess hall. But anyway, we traveled. We go to Chicago. Train stops again. I said, better yet, now I'm only 30 miles from home. Home is Waukegan. We get off, we stretch our legs, and I think, well, where's the truck to take us? And they get us back on the train, and we go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's 21 below zero when we get there, and the barracks are temporary tar paper shacks, 1 story high, 150 feet long, concrete floor, and 3 pot-belly stoves for heat and everything. In the morning, your shoes would be froze to the floor. It was that bad. And it was up to us to keep the fire going. So for 20 weeks, of course, we moved in the springtime, and it wasn't always that bad, but we went to radio school, graduated. Without even asking, they sent me to gunnery school, Las Vegas, Nevada. wonderful. 6 weeks of heaven there, flying, everything. I just really enjoyed it. Finished that. They sent me to Sioux City, Iowa. And it was I had no idea there was any kind of an airfield around there. This is a tremendous air depot. And there I was assigned to B-24 airplanes. Am I dragging enough time?
Mm-hmm. You're fine.
And then also assigned to a crew. We started training, and I was one of the lucky ones. We had a very, very accomplished pilot. He was a pilot in civilian life, so he jumped right up in rankings in the Air Force, and so he was going to be head up a lead crew, and they liked my work at the radio room and all that, so they made me the radio operator on this lead crew. And we went, if I can remember, we were stationed in Pocatello, Idaho, Boise, Idaho, Walla Walla, Washington, Watertown, South Dakota, Lincoln, Nebraska, Scribner, Nebraska. Then we finally went down to West Palm Beach, Florida, flew around the the Caribbean, like sub-patrol for 2 weeks. We were really testing out our new airplane. Then we flew the southern route. Georgetown, British Guiana was the first stop, and then Belém, Brazil, then Natal. That's right on the point where then you jump across the ocean, and there's no place to stop in between. There is a place called Ascension Island, but it was too small for 4-engine airplanes. Did you ever see a B-24? Anyway, a big, cumbersome-looking bomber, but it was the best we had at the time, and it was the best we had at the end of World War II. Okay, we landed in Natal, or Africa. No, not Natal, Dakar. Then we flew to French Morocco and then to England to our base at Tibbenham. Winter time, we get there October 43. And yeah, weather is terrible over there. It was dangerous to walk, let alone fly. And we got several missions. And then came February, and this just was in the Tribune, so I brought that along, where in 1944, during World War II, U.S. bombers began raiding German aircraft manufacturing center in a series of attacks that became known as the Big Week. The idea that the meteorologists said we're going to have 6 days of clear weather over Europe so we can go bomb. Sometimes you sit there for 10 days, you couldn't go. It was solid clouds. Now we got 6 clear days. Every bomber in England that could go went every day for 6 days. We got shot down on the 4th day. And all our targets were German fighter manufacturing plants, oil supply dumps, railroad stations, anything that would be disruptive for their resistance, which was their fighter planes, which, by the way, their fighter planes were better than ours. We're losing the war at this time, by the way. And that was our targets, figuring if we could reduce that, the bombers could fly and not have such a terrible loss rate. Like we were losing at that time 27%. Send up 100, 27 ain't coming back. That's 270 men we lose. So anyway, we get shot down on the 4th mission. We're down in Bavaria, no chance for escape. The people down there were I don't want to say they were fanatic, but if somebody bombed your house, your farm, killed your cows and chickens, maybe your children, you might, if you saw a guy coming down in a parachute, you might want to kill him too. And they warned us, our government warned us that if there was a chance of no escape and you had to surrender, be sure you do it to somebody wearing a uniform. Any part of our German army, because a civilian just might kill you. We had one guy whose parachute got hung up on a chimney. He's dangling over the side of the house, and the farmer's down there with an axe, cut off both of his legs. I mean, there's such. I met these guys in prison camp afterwards. There's such horror stories you can't believe. But these people were normal, but they were pushed. So I really don't blame Germans. The Nazis were our enemy, not the German people. Anyway, they put us on a train, 5 days, say. We could go clear across Germany, Poland, past Latvia, Lithuania, up to past East Prussia on the Baltic Ocean, right to our east, 150 miles was Siberia. That's how far up there they took us. And finally asked them, what the heck are you doing this for? And they said, well, when the war is over, he said, you're destroying our country. And when the war is over, you guys are going to rebuild it. We're going to be their slave labor. And they're stockpiling us. Well, I guess all's fair in love and war. 4 years later, at night, we could see flashes in the distance. You could hear and feel rumbles. Here comes the Russian army is moving up. Now, Germany doesn't want to give up any prisoners because that will be their bargaining chips when it comes time for whatever, peace or victory. And they're going to move the prisoners back into Germany. Now, they're still winning the war technically, but there was no transportation. They were short of gasoline just to move their equipment and all that. So we marched 10 miles to the coast, about the Baltic Ocean. They put us on a ship that they had taken away from the Lithuanian government, and the name of it was, well, that's not important, I guess. Insterburg. There's a picture of it. We were 800 of us were stuffed down below deck. The hatch is about as big as the sailing room. But when you get to the bottom of that ship, there was coal dust about that deep. You talk about misery for 2 days. They took us down the Baltic Ocean to the German seaport of Schweinemunde, which is a big one. We pull in there, we park. We're still down in this hole. And if anybody had a phobia, they went nuts. You're sitting down there in this coal dust, hardly breathe. And from down the bottom of the ship, that hatch up there looked about this big. If something ever sprung a leak, you'd never get out of this thing. So we're sitting there. We didn't know it, but it's dark out. And here comes the RAF, the Royal Air Force of England. They're bombing this harbor every damn night. So they let us sit right there. They didn't, the Nazis didn't care whether the bombs hit our ship or not. Thank God they missed, or we all would have drowned. I just know that would have been disaster. They missed it. So next morning, they bring us out of this bottom of this coal boat. And by the way, from the bottom to the top, they had a single ladder. So you can imagine 800 guys starting to suffer from malnutrition already, trying to climb that 30 feet from the bottom of the deck up to the... Anyway, we get out there in the dock, and we're a horrible looking mess. Like black coal dust and everything all over. Some guys were practically choking to death. They came around with handcuffs with a chain link about that big, and whoever was standing next to you, that's who you got handcuffed to. And I said, what the hell excuse me. I said, what in the world are they doing? Then they loaded us onto boxcars, and we traveled from the Schweinemunde back to the east into northern Poland. The town there was Gross Tissue, Grotesha. It's pronounced several different ways. I never did know what was correct. 3.5 miles outside of town, they stop the train, take us all off the train. They start pushing the guys to run. Now, we haven't eaten for 2 days in the bottom of the ship. Some guys got close enough to get a dipper of water, some didn't get any. And now we're out there after a day on the train. They're going to want us to run. And we had no idea why or where. As it turns out, the whole group was running this last 3 miles. The Nazis claimed afterwards there was a great area for escape, and they wanted to hurry us through it. That's why they made us run. They tried to qualify all these things so they wouldn't be charged with atrocities later, I'm guessing. Anyway, if your partner fell, you just pulled them on the chain over to the side of the road, because the German Kriegsmarines, that's this Hitler's youth, they're like 13 to 17 years old. They were added to the guard detail down the road, and they would bayonet, not to kill them, but just break the skin that deep. If you didn't move fast enough, they'd give it to you in the butt or in the back. On top of that, they released their trained dogs, German Shepherds and Dobermans, and they were trained. They would take chunks out of the back of some guy's leg. And I'm telling you that all I can say is everybody had the fear of God in them, that their partner could hold up and not pass out, and also he could keep those dogs away and keep running. I can't remember the count. There 8 or 9 guys died. It was like 50 some were bayoneted, with wounds that deep. That some of them died later because we didn't have any medication or anything to treat those guys. The ones with the dog bites were the worst. They all died. I didn't know that, but a dog bite could get a violent death if you don't treat it. Anyway, we get to this camp. It is Stalag 4. I should have told you. The first one was Stalag 6 up in East Prussia. Okay? So if somebody's looking at geography, now we're in northern Poland. Am I taking too long? You sure? It's 25 after. How about your lunch?
No, you're fine.
You look hungry, by the way.
No.
Okay, we can't get into camp. The camp is full. They're building it. It's brand new. We're out in the field around the camp, and the guards made a ring and kept us there for a week or 10 days. Then they finished some of the buildings, and we moved into the camp. And it was a typical prison camp with barbed wire and blah, blah, and all that. And we were there, let's say, another 4 months. And all they did was feed. By the way, the diet from the camp, from dehydrated sauerkraut that turned black when you cook it, it actually stunk. It was made in South America. I saw some of the labels on the boxes when they made, and we ate that in the first camp, one bowl a day for 3 months. In the second camp, we started out with what we called it millet. It had a different name, and it actually was a derivative of German chicken feed. But believe it or not, some of the flight surgeons afterwards said that those 2 months that we ate that might have saved a lot of lives, because there was some value in this chicken feed for the human body. And it didn't taste bad either. That when that ran out, they started giving us kohlrabi. Kohlrabi in Germany, in America, is that purple little thing. It's a delicacy if you can even find it. Kohlrabi over there is like a soccer ball, and they chop it up and they feed it to the cattle. Well, they chopped this up, put it in boiling water, and served it to us. You didn't dare try to swallow a chunk of that. You would chew on it and squeeze it, get some juice out of it, some taste, and then drink the hot water that it was in. That was our diet for approximately 2 more months. Lo and behold, here comes the rumbling in the distance and the lights at night. It's the Russians again. Now, they've advanced a couple 100 miles. They're getting close to us now. Now, the Germans are losing the war, or at best we're even. The reason I bring that up is that now they're in such dire straits. The highways were clogged with wounded Germans returning from the Russian front, and fresh troops and tanks heading east to continue the frozen battle. We crossed, this is when we're marching now. Well, I'm not getting to that part. Anyway, so everything is chaos. The Germans are going like this. Wounded retreating, others advancing. They still think they're going to win the war. And they would have if they hadn't attacked Russia. But anyway, it was so bad, and there's no more trains, no trucks. Anything that used fuel goes to the army. So they get orders to move our camp. And there was roughly 10,000 prisoners there, all Air Force, all enlisted men. And naturally a group that big is and handy. So there they, I'm going to give you this, by the way. They took the group of 10,000, was broken up into smaller groups of 400 to 1,500, and sent out on different routes to the east on different days, so that they wouldn't. You couldn't use the main highway because that's the German forces. We were walking across farm fields, walking paths, any place, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds in each group. And they split us up so they didn't have to use so many guards to watch it. We're not going anywhere. My God, the war is all around us. You wouldn't last 5 seconds. But anyway, we started, the groups had different dates. I think we started on January 21st. At that time, it was the coldest winter record ever set in Northern Europe. Nearly every day was below zero, different degree. And I was dressed not much more when I got on, and not this nice naturally. And they guess, when you became a prisoner, they took your uniform away from you, and they give you whatever they had, which could be an English battle jacket, a pair of German pants, whatever they had. So you couldn't tell by looking at a guy what branch of service he was even in. But anyway, nobody had enough clothes on. And we start out walking on a day when they said it was 18 below zero. And we said, we're every day go by, we thought, it can't get any worse. But now we just really couldn't believe that anything could be worse than this. Hardly any clothes, below zero, and we're walking. Not the first day. The second day, we walked by the end of a wagon pulled by oxen, horses that they were using in the army. So they used oxen to pull, just like the old days. And on the back of this was a German with a giant pots, steam coming out, and it was boiled potatoes. You walked by in line, he had a spoon, big one. And he'd dump a potato down, and that was your ration, and you better catch it. I'm laughing because it was funny at first. They're hot. The guys were going like this. They drop them in the mud, drop them in the snow, and you see a human being down there going through that, trying to find their food for the day. Terrible. Anyway, day after, some days nothing. Some days just water. Slept in snow in the open fields. We slept in barns with the hay infested with bugs. When they did find a farm that was, most of the area was evacuated because of war. It went one way, and now it was coming back the other way. So the poor civilians and their families had to get out of there. So a lot of it was abandoned. And we walked, our group walked for 91 days. The ground was frozen, and the Germans wouldn't give us the time or any pickaxes or shovels to dig graves. I helped bury 8 guys myself in snowbanks. Come springtime, who knows, what happened, but there's nothing else we could do. And some of the guards, just their action, there was a little bit of sympathy there in what was going on. But most of the people involved in that were what we call the real Nazis. Those guys were trained, and human life meant nothing to them, and discomfort, starvation did mean nothing to them as long as it was happening to us. When we got to Falling Basel, Germany, now that we walked halfway through Poland, nearly across all of Germany to get there. 3 months. Some of the groups, stopped at other camps near Falling Basel. Some were, as they were walking, were picked up by trucks and taken to some designation. And so not everybody went to the same place. We started out with approximately 800. I don't know how many arrived at Falling Basel, but we got there. Conditions were no better. The camp had been deserted because the Allied forces are coming from the west. Now, we have been walking for 3 months to get away from the Russians, and here the English are coming. So the Germans didn't give us any time for anything. We got some water from them, and we got a piece of German black bread. It looks like pumpernickel. It was like heaven on earth to get something like that, something with a taste to it, Oh, pardon me. It was great. But anyway, 4 days later, they roused everybody out. We start walking back to the east. We just spent 3 months walking. Now to get away from the English forces, the Allied forces, they're going to march us back. I can only touch on it briefly because we're running out of time. Is that during all of this, from the moment you were shot down until the period we're talking about, you learned a different way of life, and you made friends. There was one guy I just happened to be near, two guys really, that quite often. So we wound up together on this march. If somebody found a rotten rutabaga or something, we would share. You find it, when we would go to sleep at night in the snow, we would dig down the farm fields. And if you ever seen somebody cultivate potatoes, they don't get them all. And if we could dig through the frozen ground, we could find frozen potatoes and all. And that was our survival. By the way, anybody that was moved, like I just described to you, lost at least a third of their weight. Anyway, are we doing all right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go to lunch or that? Okay, we get to. So after 3 or 4 days, they're going to march us back. So my two buddies, Vincent Pezzator from Bayshore, Long Island, Irish, loud, funniest guy in the world, but just a wonderful man. And I would say that he saved my life a couple of times. I saved his life. And the third guy named John Van Beveren, died before we could get out of this mess. But anyway, we start marching back. The first day, well, by the way, on this march, you would go maybe 3, 4, 5 miles. They give you a break alongside the road so you could rest. And first day out, they give us a break. And Pezzator says, hey, there was a culvert right there. Water running through it about that deep. This is April. This is like winter, late winter over there. So he said, they can't count anymore. I mean, there's such chaos. There's still troops going back and forth and gunfire all over. And the English were shooting at us at one time. But anyway, so he said, let's get out of here. So at the break, we crawled into this culvert, the three of us. We were laying on water, freezing to death that deep. You got to be quiet. And they finally, the marchers all moved on. It was quiet. It got dark. We got out. We went back to the camp. They had left, I think it was 16 or 17 prisoners there that couldn't walk, had lost a leg or something, that couldn't walk at all. And they just left them there, you know. Who's going to feed them? They couldn't. Anyway, we get back there. We lay low. The next morning, we're out looking out the windows. No Germans. See a couple of soldiers walking by. We actually saw Germans throw their rifle down because they're heavy, but to them the war was over. And that made us feel good, like, and here come the English were coming, you could hear them and all that. So we spent 2 days, Pezzator and I, and Van Beveren, scouting the area, trying to make sure nobody shoots us. The English or the retreating Germany had no reason not to shoot you, you know. So we tried to catch some chickens. We were too weak. We couldn't catch chickens, but We found some rifles that the Germans threw down, Mausers of some had shells. We shot chickens, blew the chickens all apart, but enough you could make stew out of. And I'll tell you what, the 16, 17 cripples we were left behind, and the three of us, we had our first decent meal in a year. We made chicken soup. And anyway, we found a farmer's shed, they used to store stuff underground, keep it from spoiling, like their bread. Had no wrappings on the bread. They didn't worry. They just stacked it like fireplace logs in a warehouse. It would last 6 months. A loaf of our bread, it'd be gone in 2 days with mold and everything. And we found a whole bunch of that. Took all we could carry back to the camp. We told those guys, if the troops aren't this far along, we'll be back in 4 or 5 days. I said, we're going to try to find them and tell them about us being there so they don't start shooting and kill the prisoners that can't walk. So we take off, and we nearly got shot a couple of times. They're saying, what's the password? And we said, we don't know, we're prisoners of war. They should. Anyway, finally, we get to some Englishmen that talk to us. A guy on a tank. The tank was as big as this building, it looked like. They were called the British 8th Hussars. They defeated Rommel in the battle in Africa. It was a famous thing. You're too young to remember all this, but that is really a big name. And he said, I don't have any food to give you, but he said, I'll get you some. So the next day, here comes a truck. Didn't bring any food, but they took us all out. I don't know where the cripple guys went, but Van Beveren, Pesator, and I, they took us to we're the only able-bodied people of this group, by the way. We went to a little like a town hall in Fallingbosel. And Field Marshal Montgomery, the big man in the British Army, was coming by. It was going to make a speech. And they wanted some representatives from America. The only ones they had was 3 grimy prisoners of war. Hadn't seen a bar of soap in over a year. I never got into that personal hygiene thing. But the Nazis should be shot just for denying those things you need for personal hygiene. That is terrible. Day after, I never had my clothes off for that march, 91 days. Never had my clothes off. Can you imagine? Never mind. Anyway, they take us to this meeting. Montgomery gets up there and makes a speech of how the British won the war. And we're sitting there looking at each other, and all the British soldiers are spit and polish. You wouldn't go in front of Field Marshal Montgomery, or they'd shoot you if you weren't just perfect. And here we are, 3 prisoners. I can't explain how grimy, stinky, rotten you can be after 3 months, after a year with no soap. Anyway, well, no sense dwelling on that. But anyway, then they put us in a tent, and a British captain comes in and says, we don't know what to do with you. There's no American lines closed. This is a section of the war was all English. But an hour later, here comes it. They march us out, put us on a truck, take us to a German airfield that they had captured. And 1:45. We still got time? Got an hour? Okay. We get on the airplane, we said, hey, now we already knew about every prisoner of war in Europe usually was siphoned through a place on the French coast called Camp Lucky Strike. They went through there. Maybe you heard that before. They were deloused, showered, uniformed, put on a boat. They were home in 5 days. Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, right over to Norfolk, Virginia, from Plymouth, England. We thought, we're flying to, hey, we'll be home in a week. Now, the idea that I should have mentioned when we did escape, we wanted to be the first ones home. You know, when you're young, I was 20 years old. When you're young, you think of crazy things, not survival. We wanted to be the first ones home. The war just ended in May. I didn't tell you when they, oh, excuse me, I missed it. The English plane the English plane didn't take us to Camp Lucky Strike. They took us to a hospital in Oxford, England. It was an Army General Hospital. And except for that hospital, there hadn't been an American in that area probably in 1,000 years. And we said, what are we doing here? He said, well, you're displaced persons. We didn't know what to do with you. So we got the greatest treatment in the world for about a week. We were well on the road to recovery, far from our original weight, but they let us go on May 5th, right before VE Day. We were in London that night, by the way, and went back to the hospital. They said, we got to move you out, and they said, we haven't got your orders yet where to send you. So they put us up in an apartment building in Leicester Square. To give you an idea where that is in London, it's just one station on the subway away from Piccadilly Circus, where all the entertainment was, the music, and so forth. It's like Broadway in New York. So what in the world are we doing here? It was an apartment building, and there were some other soldiers in there, no Americans, and no POWs. And they said, by the way, there was only one bathroom for like six rooms, but at least it was a cot, hot soap and water. We thought we had died and went to heaven. Anyway, they said, just check the bulletin board every day. It'll have your instructions on there. Every day we look. In the meantime, they paid us. They didn't even know how long we'd been in prison. I mean, they just took our word for it. They paid us £11 every 2 days. On the exchange, that would be $44 every 2 days. And back in 1945, that was a lot of money. We, the three of us, lived like kings. Every 2 days, we go in and get $44. It went against our pay, but we found out later. But they gave us the money because they didn't have a mess hall. They couldn't feed us, and as part of your being in the Army, they're supposed to feed you. So they gave us the cash. Go buy your own food. We lived like kings. Beer, whiskey. But that grew old after 3 weeks. 3 weeks. We wanted to be the first ones home. Here we're sitting in London. People handing us money. Just shut up and stay there. Couldn't believe it. Finally, one day the officer comes through and says, check the bulletin board in the morning, be ready to go. We went down bulletin board, truck comes in, takes us over to Plymouth, England. That's on the coast of England on the south side. We wanted to be the first ones home. It's already June. The war ended a month ago. And what do you think is the boat that brought us home? It was a naval LST. That's the landing craft. You know that? With the big door in the front? You know how fast they go? 7 knots. I can walk down this hallway with a cane and go faster than that. Now, we're trying to be the first ones home. That boat took 16 days to cross the Atlantic from Plymouth, England to Norfolk, Virginia. I couldn't believe it. We escaped. We put our life on the line to get home early, and everything we did went the other way. The English takes us to no man's land, blah, 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 blah. And so, anyway, we finally got home. Van Beveren died right away from something he picked up over there. But Vincent Pesator lived to 1989, and I'm the last of the Mohegans. Same thing of our bomber crew. 2 of them were killed when we were shot down at the target. 3 of them were wounded terrible. 2 of them was in German hospital the entire period of time I just told you about. They were hurt so bad. One guy was paralyzed from the waist down from shrapnel that lodged in his spine. That's not the end of that story, but I'll make it quick. Anyway, we get back home. The one guy got injured in his spine. He lived for 37 years in VA hospitals. He was paralyzed, no family. Back in those days, 37 years ago, I don't know what VA hospitals did, but they took good care of him. I used to meet another one of our crewmen from Wichita. I would fly from Chicago. We'd go down and visit him twice a year, spend a weekend with him. He seemed to be happy. But I'm just trying to say, can you imagine being in a hospital for 37 years? I go there for 2 days, I'm climbing a wall. 37 years. Anyway, he passed away shortly. Our ball-turret gunner from Wichita just died last September. So I'm the last man standing. Now you know. That was Flight Crew 117. 8th Air Force. That was the 445th Bomb Group, the 702nd Bomb Squadron. Our only claim to fame was we always hit our target, and Jimmy Stewart, the movie star, was in our company. And a nice guy. And got a lot more stuff here. I'm going to pass on to you. Maybe somebody in the Illinois library would enjoy some of this stuff. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, Cheryl.
Well, I would like to say thank you for allowing me to interview you. And thank you for giving me the honor to hear your story.
There's thousands of guys out there had the same thing or worse. The ones that didn't come back at all. Pardon me. I've been divorced twice, so I know how to cry. I'm kidding. Okay.